Ever stare at your phone knowing she's seen your message, knowing she's online, knowing she could reply, but she doesn't? Minutes stretch into hours. Your chest tightens just a little. You replay your last text. You wonder if you said too much. Or worse, if you weren't enough. And the silence feels louder than any rejection ever could. But here's the part no one tells you. Being ignored isn't what hurts you. What hurts is what happens inside you the moment you start waiting. The moment your peace gets placed in someone else's hands. Because right now, this isn't about her response. It's about your reaction. It's about how quickly your focus drifts away from your own life and locks onto someone who hasn't earned that power. And if you're honest, this isn't the first time. Different name, same feeling, same spiral. What if this moment, this silence, wasn't a loss? What if it was the exact pressure point that exposes where your power leaks and the doorway to taking it back for good? Being ignored doesn't just sting emotionally. It hits deeper than that. Your brain is wired to fear uncertainty more than rejection itself. A clear no gives your nervous system closure. Silence doesn't. Silence keeps the threat alive. It leaves a question mark hanging in your mind, and your brain hates unanswered questions. So it starts filling in the blanks for you. And almost every time, it fills them in against you. You don't think maybe she's busy. You think I messed up. You scan your last message like it's evidence in a trial. You replay the conversation, searching for the exact moment you lost ground. This isn't weakness. This is biology. The same part of your brain that once needed social approval to survive still reacts to social exclusion like danger. Modern technology makes this 10 times worse. Read receipts, online status, stories being posted while your message sits unanswered. Your brain doesn't interpret that as neutral information. It interprets it as intentional exclusion. And intentional exclusion triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. That's why it feels so personal, even when nothing has actually been said. Here's what most advice gets wrong. This reaction isn't about dating. It's about validation. When someone's attention becomes a source of reassurance, silence feels like a withdrawal. Not because you need her, but because part of you is using her response to stabilize your sense of worth in that moment. And this is where the real danger begins. Not when she ignores you, but when your internal state starts orbiting her behavior. When your focus drifts from your body, your goals, your day, and collapses into waiting. Most men never realize this is the exact moment they lose control. Not to her, but to their own untrained emotional reflex. And once you see that, you start to understand why silence feels so powerful, and why it doesn't have to be. When a woman goes silent, most men think the loss is obvious. Her interest, her attraction, her attention. But that's not what actually costs you the most. The real loss happens quietly, internally, before you even realize it's happening. It's the moment your day starts bending around her response. When you check your phone before checking in with yourself. When your mood lifts or sinks based on whether a notification appears. That's the trade most men make without noticing. They exchange internal stability for external validation. At that point, it doesn't matter if she eventually replies or not. The damage is already done. You've handed over authority over your emotional state. You're no longer leading your life. You're reacting to it. And the more you react, the more your sense of control erodes. This is why being ignored feels so heavy. It's not about desire. It's about power. Silence exposes how much influence someone else has over your inner world. And for men who haven't trained emotional discipline, that exposure feels like humiliation, even when no one else can see it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The moment you start waiting, hoping, refreshing your screen, you've already placed yourself beneath the situation. Not because she's superior, but because you've made her behavior the reference point for your worth. And this isn't unique to dating. The same pattern shows up when a boss doesn't respond. when a client delays, when approval is uncertain. Men who haven't mastered this moment carry the same anxiety everywhere they go. But silence doesn't take your power. It reveals where you've been giving it away. And once you see that, you're no longer trapped by the need for a response. You're standing at the edge of a decision. Either keep outsourcing your peace or take responsibility for it. Because the moment you stop chasing attention is the moment something begins to shift. Most people hear Stoic and think it means being cold, emotionless, or pretending not to care. That's not it. Stoicism isn't about shutting emotions down. It's about not letting them run the show. It's the difference between feeling something and being controlled by it. At its core, the Stoic frame is simple. There are things you influence and things you don't. Her reply lives on the outside of that line. Your response lives entirely on your side of it. The moment you confuse those two, stress takes over. The moment you separate them, clarity returns. This is why silence feels unbearable to some men and almost irrelevant to others. The difference isn't confidence. It's training. One man treats silence as a verdict on his value. The other treats it as neutral information. Same situation. Completely different internal experience. Here's the shift that changes everything. You stop asking, "Why is she doing this?" and start asking, "What's the most disciplined response available to me right now?" That question immediately puts you back in control. It pulls your attention away from speculation and back into action. And here's the part most men misunderstand. Sometimes the most disciplined response isn't a clever message, a perfectly timed reply, or a strategic move. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's stillness. Sometimes it's choosing not to add more energy to a situation that's already revealing enough. This isn't passive. It's selective. You're not freezing. You're refusing to react impulsively. You're letting the situation show you what it is without interfering out of anxiety. Because the moment you stop trying to manage her behavior, you start mastering your own. And that's where real strength begins to surface. There's a very specific moment where everything can go wrong. It's that surge of discomfort that hits right after you realize she's not replying. Your fingers hover over the screen. Your mind starts negotiating. Maybe I should follow up. Maybe I should clarify. Maybe she misunderstood. This is the crossroads most men never recognize. Reacting feels productive. It feels like you're doing something to regain control. But in reality, it does the opposite. Every impulsive message trains your nervous system to believe relief only comes from external reassurance. And the more you practice that pattern, the harder it becomes to sit with uncertainty without spiraling. When you don't react, when you consciously choose not to chase, explain, or seek closure, you interrupt that loop. At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural. That discomfort is your nervous system recalibrating. It's learning that you can survive uncertainty without collapsing into it. This is where restraint becomes powerful, not as a tactic, as a signal to yourself. You're proving that your emotional state doesn't depend on immediate feedback, that your time, energy, and attention aren't automatically available just because silence makes you uneasy. Something subtle happens here. The noise quiets down. The urge fades. Your focus starts drifting back to your body, your environment, your responsibilities. The situation stops feeling urgent because you've stopped treating it like an emergency. And this is the part most men miss. The moment you stop reacting, you don't lose leverage, you gain it. Not over her, but over yourself. You reclaim the ability to choose your next move instead of being dragged into it by emotion. Silence no longer feels like a threat. It becomes information. And once you reach that point, you're no longer chasing clarity. You're grounded enough to let it come to you. That restless energy you feel when you're being ignored, the tightness in your chest, the inability to sit still, the constant pull to check your phone. Most men try to numb that feeling. They scroll, distract, complain, or wait it out. But that discomfort is raw fuel, and very few know how to use it. Your body is flooded with energy because it thinks something important is unresolved. Instead of fighting that sensation, you redirect it. You give it a task. Physical effort is the fastest outlet. A hard workout, a long walk, pushing your body until your thoughts have no choice but to quiet down. Movement grounds you back into yourself. But momentum doesn't stop at the physical level. Mental friction needs a target too. This is where deep focus matters. The project you've been avoiding, the skill you keep postponing, the work that requires presence instead of emotion. When you channel that restless attention into something demanding, your mind shifts from obsession to progress. Here's the reframe that changes everything. You're not improving yourself to prove anything to her. You're doing it because every minute spent waiting is a minute stolen from your own life. Growth becomes the byproduct of refusing to sit in helplessness. Over time, something unexpected happens. The silence that once consumed you starts to feel small. Not because she changed, but because you did. Your identity expands. Your days fill up. And when your life has weight, distractions lose their grip. This is how men quietly level up. Not through dramatic declarations, through disciplined redirection, through turning emotional discomfort into forward motion. And the more momentum you build, the less you need answers from anyone else. That's when you realize you were never stuck. You were just unfocused. Detachment gets a bad reputation. People hear the word and think it means shutting down, pretending not to care, or acting cold to protect your ego. That's not detachment. That's avoidance. Real detachment is quieter and far more powerful. Detachment doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you refuse to let one outcome dictate your inner state. You can be interested without being invested. You can care without clinging. That distinction is where emotional maturity lives. Most men attach too quickly, not to the person, but to the result. They start imagining futures, assigning meaning, and building expectations before consistency is ever proven. So when silence appears, it doesn't just disrupt communication. It collapses a story they were already living inside their head. Detachment breaks that pattern. It brings you back to the present. You stop chasing potential and start paying attention to reality. You stop asking, "What could this become?" and start asking, "What is this actually showing me?" And here's the part that's uncomfortable to admit. Detachment forces honesty. It exposes when you've been more invested than the situation deserves. When you've been negotiating your standards for the promise of attention. Letting go of that fantasy can feel like loss, but it's actually clarity. This mindset doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you selective. You stop overextending emotional energy where it isn't reciprocated. You reserve depth for people who show up with consistency, not just chemistry. And when you detach properly, something shifts inside you. The anxiety fades. The pressure disappears. You're no longer trying to hold the situation together. You're letting it reveal itself. That's when you stop needing outcomes and start trusting yourself instead. If she reaches out again, this is where most men undo all their progress. The relief hits, the tension releases, and suddenly there's an urge to explain, to joke off, to ask what happened, or to subtly seek reassurance that it won't happen again. That impulse is understandable, but it's also the fastest way to slip back into the old dynamic. The grounded response is simpler than most expect. You don't confront the silence. You don't punish it either. You respond calmly, without emotional weight attached. Not distant, not overeager, just present. The message underneath isn't forced, it's felt. My stability didn't disappear while you were gone. This isn't about playing hard to get. It's about not rewriting your emotional state based on someone else's availability. When you act as if nothing needs to be resolved, you're communicating something far stronger than words. You're showing that your life continued uninterrupted. And here's the key shift. You're no longer seeking clarity. You're observing behavior. Consistency matters more than explanations. Anyone can disappear and come back with a reason. Not everyone can show up steadily over time. If she returns with genuine interest, it will show in effort, presence, and reliability, not just messages. And if that consistency isn't there, you won't feel the urge to convince or correct it. You'll simply adjust your investment. That's the difference between reacting and choosing. One hands over control, the other keeps it. When you're rooted in yourself, her return doesn't spike your emotions. It informs your decision. And that's when you realize the power was never in the silence or the reply. It was in how little you needed either one. The hardest question for most men is the one they avoid asking. What if she never comes back? The fear of that outcome can feel suffocating, but it's also a moment of ultimate clarity. If she doesn't reach out, it isn't a failure. It's a lesson. It's the universe, or reality itself, showing you that your attention, your energy, and your presence were never fully aligned with someone who valued them. This is where many men get stuck. They replay the what-ifs, mourn the imagined potential, or try to manufacture connection through excuses or messages. That's wasted energy. It doesn't build character. It doesn't create opportunity. It only prolongs dependence on someone else for validation. When you accept that she might never respond, a remarkable thing happens: freedom. You stop orbiting her world. You stop negotiating your self-worth for a chance at her attention. You reclaim every ounce of focus, time, and energy that was previously trapped in anticipation. You redirect it to yourself, your growth, your life. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop caring about whether she returns, you become more magnetic, not because of manipulation, but because of presence. People are drawn to those who aren't desperate, who aren't seeking approval, who operate from self-contained power. Detachment from the outcome is the hardest, but most transformative lesson. You're no longer defined by someone else's decisions. You're defined by the actions you take with your own time, energy, and focus. And that kind of autonomy is rare, powerful, and compelling. Because, at the end of the day, whether she comes back or not is almost irrelevant. What matters is that you continue to move forward. You continue to build, to grow, to improve. The silence that once threatened you, now, becomes the fuel that drives you forward. And when you live from that place, you realize the truth. You were never waiting for her. You were waiting to discover how strong you could be when no one else's actions could shake you. Here's where it all comes together. The moment when the old version of you meets the new. For years, you may have let attention, approval, and validation dictate your emotions. You reacted impulsively, chased outcomes, and measured your worth through someone else's behavior. That version of you was alive, but it wasn't free. The new version? He's different. He doesn't seek validation because he's found it within himself. He doesn't react to silence because he understands that emotional control is his true power. The old urgency, the anxiety, the replaying of texts, they fade because he no longer measures his value against someone else's choices. This isn't about being unfeeling. It's about being grounded, calm, deliberate. He's aware of discomfort, but discomfort no longer dictates action. He's selective with his energy, disciplined in his focus, and consistent in his standards. He doesn't bend to uncertainty. He navigates it. And here's the revelation. Once you internalize this, it ripples through every area of life. Work, friendships, health, ambitions. They all gain momentum because your internal compass is no longer hijacked by external signals. Freedom, self-respect, and presence become natural, not aspirational. The identity shift isn't instant. It's built in moments like this. Moments of waiting without panic, of redirecting energy instead of chasing, of choosing detachment over obsession. Each decision compounds. Each choice reinforces the version of you that is unshakable, magnetic, and undeniably in control. By the time silence passes, or doesn't, you realize the power was never hers to take. It was always yours to reclaim. And that awareness, it changes everything. So here's the bottom line. Being ignored isn't a verdict on your worth. It's a mirror showing how much control you've surrendered over your own life. Every notification you refresh, every text you rehearse, every moment spent hoping for a reply is a moment of your power being handed away. The good news? You don't need permission to take it back. You don't need a reply to validate you. You don't need someone else's attention to prove your value. It's already inside you, waiting to be claimed. Start with small choices. Pause before you react. Shift that energy into action. Whether it's building your body, sharpening your mind, or moving closer to a goal you've been postponing. Detach from outcomes without detaching from yourself. Let silence be your teacher, not your tormentor. This isn't about dating. It's about mastery of your emotions, your focus, and your life. Calm, disciplined, self-directed energy draws respect, attraction, and opportunities in ways desperation never will. So today, decide who owns your attention. Decide who controls your emotions. Decide that no one, not even someone important, can dictate your peace. Start now. Take back your power. And from this moment on, live anchored in yourself, because that is the only foundation that can never be shaken.